My blood splattered onto the hardwood floor, a stark crimson contrast against the polished oak. The stinging sensation on my cheek was not just from the impact of my mother's hand, but from the sharp metal edge of the diamond ring I had bought her for Christmas last year. "You ungrateful brat!" she hissed, her face twisted into a mask of venom that her church friends would never recognize. "We need that money for your sister, and we need it now." Before I could even raise a hand to shield myself, my father shoved me hard, pinning my shoulders against the cold plaster of the hallway wall. My 7-year-old daughter's terrified scream pierced the air, shattering the soul of the home I had worked so hard to build. In that moment, 30 years of manipulation and abuse crystallized into pure clarity. They thought they had broken me. They thought violence would force me to open my checkbook. They had no idea that 3 months ago I had secretly purchased their debt. They were standing in the house owned by the daughter they despised, demanding money they did not know I controlled. Power shifts without warning. My name is Jada, and at 32 years old, I am a forensic accountant who specializes in finding hidden assets and exposing financial fraud. I have taken down corrupt CEOs and money laundering rings in Chicago, yet I could never quite escape the grasp of my own parents, Desmond and Bernice. If you have ever felt like the ATM machine for a family that does not respect you, please hit the like button and subscribe. I am sharing this story to show you that sometimes the only way to heal is to burn the bridge while they are still standing on it. The Sunday afternoon had started deceptively quiet. I had invited my parents and my younger sister Ebony over for lunch, hoping to maintain some semblance of a relationship for the sake of my daughter Maya. But the peace lasted exactly 10 minutes. Ebony, the golden child of the family who had never worked a full 40-hour week in her life, was getting married. Her fiancé Hunter, a man from a wealthy white family that I had always suspected was broke, was lounging on my Italian leather sofa with his feet up drinking my expensive scotch. The explosion happened when Ebony threw a brochure for the Palmer House Hilton on my coffee table. She needed $75,000 for the venue deposit, and she needed it by tomorrow morning. When I calmly explained that I had already contributed $10,000 to her dress and would not be funding an entire luxury wedding, the atmosphere shifted from entitled to dangerous. My mother Bernice stood up slowly. She was a woman who wore her deaconess title like a shield, using scripture to justify her greed. She walked over to me, her eyes cold. "You have millions sitting in these accounts, Jada. We know you do. Your father and I sacrificed everything to raise you, and now you want to embarrass us by letting your sister get married in some cheap community hall. You are selfish. You have always been selfish." That was when the slap came. It was swift and practiced. The diamond ring caught my cheekbones, slicing the skin. I stumbled back, shocked not by the violence, but by the audacity. My hand flew to my face, coming away wet with blood. Maya screamed from the top of the stairs. "Mommy!" I turned to run to her, but my father Desmond, a man who preached about gentleness from the pulpit every Sunday, lunged at me. He slammed me against the wall, his forearm pressing against my windpipe. His breath smelled of peppermint and rage. "You listen to me, girl. You will write that check. Hunter's family is expecting a certain standard. We will not look like paupers because you want to hoard your money." From the living room, Hunter didn't even stand up. He just swirled his drink, a smirk playing on his lips as he watched my father assault me. "Easy there, Desmond Hunter," drawled his voice, dripping with that casual arrogance that made my skin crawl. "Don't damage her too much. She can't sign a check if her hand is broken. Just teach her some respect." I looked up at the staircase. Maya was shaking, clutching her teddy bear, her eyes wide with a trauma I had prayed she would never witness. I saw the fear in her eyes, and then I saw something else. I saw the cycle. I saw my own childhood reflected in her terror. If I fought back physically, my father would escalate. He would hurt me worse, or in the chaos, they might hurt Maya. I had to de-escalate. I had to be smarter. I needed to tap into the part of me that analyzed spreadsheets for the FBI. I needed to be cold. I let my body go limp against the wall. I dropped my hands to my sides in a gesture of total surrender. I forced tears into my eyes, not of pain, but of performative regret. I lowered my head, mimicking the beaten dog they wanted me to be. Please. I choked out, my voice trembling. Please, Daddy, stop. You are right. I am sorry. Desmond hesitated. He looked at Bernice, who was wiping a speck of my blood from her ring with a tissue, looking annoyed rather than remorseful. I am sorry, I repeated, looking directly at my mother. I didn't mean to be selfish. I am stressed with work. But you are right. Ebony deserves the perfect wedding. I will pay for the Palmer house. The tension in the room evaporated instantly. It was terrifying how quickly they switched from predators to satisfied customers. Desmond released me, smoothing down his shirt, as if he hadn't just choked his daughter. See, Bernice said, stepping forward to pat my uninjured cheek, ignoring the blood dripping onto my collar. I told you she just needed a firm hand. The Lord loves a cheerful giver, Jada. I took a deep, shaky breath, wiping the blood from my jaw. But I want to do more than that. I said, playing the most dangerous card in my deck. I don't want us to fight. I realized watching you today that I have been too distant. I want to help with the wedding properly. I looked at Hunter, then back at my parents. Why don't you all move in here, just until the wedding? My house has 6 bedrooms. It is closer to the city for the planning. Ebony and Hunter can take the master suite on the 2nd floor. Mom and Dad, you can have the guest wing. Let me take care of you. Let me make this right. Ebony squealed, jumping up from the chair she had been watching from. Oh my God, really? The master suite with the jacuzzi tub. Hunter sat up. His interest piqued. That would save us the commute from the suburbs. And your chef creates decent meals, I suppose. My father nodded solemnly, as if he were granting me a favor. That is a good Christian decision, Jada. It is time you opened your home to your family. We will bring our bags tomorrow. They bought it. They bought it hook, line, and sinker. They saw a broken woman trying to buy back her family's love. They saw a victim. I excused myself to go to the bathroom to clean up my face. As I locked the door and looked in the mirror, the trembling stopped. My reflection stared back at me, blood smeared across my cheek, but my eyes were dry and hard as flint. They had no idea. They didn't know that 3 months ago I had investigated a series of suspicious wire transfers from my father's church accounts. I had traced the money to an offshore gambling site registered to Hunter. I knew my parents had drained their retirement funds and secretly took out a 3rd mortgage on their house to cover Hunter's debts, thinking he was rich and just having liquidity issues. They didn't know that the bank was foreclosing on their home next week. And they definitely didn't know that I had formed an anonymous LLC and bought that non-performing loan. I was legally the owner of their house. I held their debt. I held their secrets. By inviting them into my home, I wasn't surrendering. I was bringing them into a controlled environment where I could record every conversation, document every abuse, and gather the final pieces of evidence I needed to send them to prison for fraud and embezzlement. I turned on the faucet, washing the blood away. The water swirled pink in the white porcelain sink. Let them come. Let them sleep in my beds and eat my food. They were walking into a lion's den, and they were too arrogant to see the teeth. The wedding was going to be spectacular, just not in the way they thought. The invasion began at 8 in the morning on a Tuesday. I stood by the front window of my living room watching a massive moving truck back into my driveway, crushing the blooming hydrangeas I had planted with Maya just last spring. The driver didn't even tap the brakes as the rear tires rolled over the flower bed, grinding the purple petals into the mud. It was a perfect metaphor for what was about to happen to my life. My father Desmond hopped out of the passenger seat, barking orders at the movers, as if he were the lord of the manor. He pointed at the front door, gesturing with his cane, looking every bit the patriarch he believed himself to be. My mother Bernice stepped out of her sedan behind the truck, holding a garment bag that looked like it contained enough sequins to blind a congregation. Ebony and Hunter arrived last in Hunter's leased BMW, looking less like family members moving in to help and more like tourists checking into a 5-star resort. I opened the front door, forcing a smile onto my face. Before I could even offer a greeting, Hunter brushed past me carrying a case of wine. He didn't look at me. He just scanned the foyer, nodding approvingly at the high ceilings and the crystal chandelier. "Nice place, Jada," he muttered, though his tone suggested he was surprised someone like me could afford it. "A bit gaudy for my taste, but it will do." Ebony followed him, dropping 2 heavy suitcases right in the middle of the hallway. She looked around, wrinkling her nose. "It smells like cleaning products in here. Did you scrub the floors yourself?" "We are going to need to get a professional service. My allergies can't handle cheap chemicals." I took a deep breath. "Welcome home," I said, my voice steady. The first battle line was drawn 20 minutes later. I had prepared the guest wing for my parents. It was a lovely suite with its own bathroom and access to the garden. I had assumed Ebony and Hunter would take the second guest room upstairs. I was wrong. I found Bernice in my master bedroom. She was currently sweeping my clothes off the hangers in my walk-in closet, tossing my silk blouses and tailored suits onto the floor in a heap. "Mom, what are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "This is my room. The guest suite is downstairs." Bernice didn't stop. She threw a pair of my heels into the corner. "Don't be ridiculous, Jada. Hunter has a bad back. He needs the California King mattress, and your father needs to be near the upstairs study to work on his sermons. You are young and healthy. You don't need all this space just for yourself. It is selfish." I looked at the pile of my belongings on the floor. My sanctuary. The room I had designed as a retreat from the world. "So where am I supposed to sleep?" I asked. Ebony walked in holding a glass of iced tea she had already helped herself to from my fridge. She leaned against the doorframe, smirking. "Well, since we are taking the other guest rooms for storage, and my dressing room, Dad said you could take the finished basement. It has a pull-out couch, doesn't it? Plus it is quieter down there. You won't disturb us when you leave early for work." The basement. They were banishing the owner of the house to the basement. I felt the familiar sting of humiliation rising in my chest, the old Jada wanting to scream and kick them out. But the new Jada, the forensic accountant who played the long game, saw an opportunity. "That is fine," I said, lowering my head submissively. "You are right. Hunter needs the bed. I will move my things downstairs." Hunter walked by, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "Thanks, Jada. You are finally learning to be a team player. Just make sure you clear out your toiletries from the master bath. I need counter space for my grooming kit." By dinner time, the house felt alien. The air was thick with tension and the smell of expensive cologne that Hunter wore like a weapon. I had decided to cook a traditional meal to welcome them, a peace offering of sorts. I spent 3 hours making smothered pork chops, collard greens, yams, and cornbread. It was the food my grandmother used to make comfort food that usually brought people together. We sat at the long dining table. I placed a plate in front of Hunter. He looked down at the food, then up at me, his lip curling in distaste. "What is this?" he asked, poking the greens with his fork. "It is dinner," I said. "Pork chops and greens." Hunter sighed, pushing the plate away. "God, Jada. No wonder heart disease is so rampant in your community. This is a heart attack on a plate. I don't eat this kind of heavy, greasy soul food. My trainer would kill me." My father, who had eaten this food his entire life, nodded in agreement with Hunter. "He is right, Jada. We are trying to elevate ourselves. Hunter comes from a different background. You should have prepared something lighter, maybe some grilled salmon or a salad. You need to be more considerate of our guest's palate." I watched my father cut into the pork chop and take a massive bite even as he criticized me. Hunter stood up. "I am going to order something. Is there a decent sushi place in this neighborhood, or do I have to drive back to the city?" He didn't wait for an answer. He walked into the living room and turned on the television, blasting the volume. Maya was sitting next to me, picking at her cornbread. She looked small and frightened. She whispered, "Mommy, I like the food." Hunter shouted from the other room, "Hey, keep it down in there. I am trying to watch the game." I squeezed Maya's hand. "It is okay, baby. Eat your dinner." Later that evening, the microaggressions turned into direct parenting interference. Maya was playing with her dolls in the hallway, laughing as she made them have a tea party. It was 7:30, well before her bedtime. Hunter stormed out of the master bedroom, my bedroom. Jada, can you control your child? It is impossible to relax with that racket. She is playing Hunter, I said, standing up. It is her house, too. Hunter scoffed. In my family, children are seen and not heard. You let her run wild. That is why she is so undisciplined. You are raising her to be loud and obnoxious. If she were my kid, she would be in bed by now. My mother chimed in from the kitchen. Listen to him, Jada. Hunter knows about proper upbringing. His family is very established. You are too soft on Maya. Maybe it is good Hunter is here to show a strong male influence. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. They were criticizing my parenting in front of my daughter. I saw Maya's eyes fill with tears as she silently gathered her dolls and ran to the basement stairs. I cleared the table in silence. I washed the dishes while they laughed and drank wine in the living room. I was the maid. I was the basement dweller. I was the outsider in the home I paid for. But when midnight came and the house finally fell silent, I went to work. I moved through the shadows of the hallway, a small toolkit in my hand. I wasn't just a victim. I was an investigator. And investigators document everything. I started in the living room. I stood on a chair and carefully removed the face of the smoke detector. Inside, I wired a high-definition pinhole camera with a microphone. It was invisible to the naked eye. I moved to the kitchen, placing another device inside the ventilation grate. I crept up the stairs, my heart pounding against my ribs. I could hear Hunter snoring in my bed. I placed a camera in the hallway plant angled directly at the master bedroom door. I put another one in the study where my father would be making his calls. Every camera was connected to a secure cloud server that only I could access. From my laptop in the basement, I would see everything. I would hear every whispered insult, every plan they hatched, every lie they told. I went down to the basement, locking the door behind me. I sat on the lumpy pull-out couch surrounded by boxes of my clothes. I opened my laptop. The screen flickered to life, showing a grid of 6 different feeds. On the screen, I saw my mother walking into the kitchen for a glass of water. I heard her mutter to herself, "I can't believe she kept that ugly painting. We need to redecorate this entire floor before the wedding guests arrive." I watched her open my pantry and throw away the cereal Maya liked, replacing it with her own gluten-free granola. I sat back, the blue light of the screen illuminating my face. They thought they had conquered my territory. They thought they had put me in my place. But all they had done was walk onto a stage where I was the director. The invasion was complete. But the surveillance had just begun, and I was going to capture every single frame of their destruction. The glass walls of my corner office on the 42nd floor of the Willis Tower usually offered me a sense of detachment. From this height, the chaos of Chicago looked like a silent, organized grid. Inside my office, the world was even more orderly. As a senior forensic accountant, my life was governed by spreadsheets, audit trails, and the absolute truth of numbers. Numbers do not lie. They do not manipulate. They do not gaslight you. That sanctuary of silence was shattered at 10:30 in the morning on a Wednesday. I was in the middle of a high-stakes conference call with the FBI regarding a money laundering scheme involving a local construction firm when my assistant Sarah burst into my office. Her face was pale. "Jada, I am so sorry," Sarah stammered, holding the door handle with a white-knuckled grip. I tried to stop her. I told her you were in a meeting. Before I could ask who she was talking about, the door was shoved open with enough force to rattle the framed degrees on the wall. My mother Bernice marched in. She was wearing her Sunday best, an oversized hat with a silk flower and a matching cream-colored suit that cost more than my assistant made in a week. She looked like the picture of elegance to a stranger, but I knew the tightness around her eyes. She was in a rage. I signaled for the agents on the video call to hold and muted my microphone. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced my face to remain impassive. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I asked, standing up. This is a place of business. Bernice didn't lower her voice. In fact, she projected it, making sure every junior associate in the open plan bullpen outside could hear her. Do not you dare take that tone with me, Jada. She slammed her crocodile skin handbag onto my mahogany desk. I am standing at the checkout counter at Saks Fifth Avenue, trying to buy a dress for the rehearsal dinner, and the card declined. Declined. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? The salesgirl looked at me like I was a criminal. I kept my voice low, painfully aware that the glass walls of my office were not soundproof. Mom, we discussed this. The card has a limit. You cut me off! She shrieked, tears instantly welling up in her eyes. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. She turned slightly, ensuring my colleagues could see her distress. I raised you. I clothed you. I sacrificed my own career so you could sit in this air-conditioned tower and judge people. And now you treat your own mother like a beggar. You have millions, Jada. Millions. And you begrudge me a dress. I saw the heads of the senior partners turning in the hallway. This was her weapon. Public humiliation. She knew that as a black woman in a high corporate position, I had to work twice as hard to maintain my composure. Any sign of attitude or drama could damage the professional reputation I had spent decades building. She was banking on my fear of losing face to get what she wanted. I walked around the desk, trying to guide her away from the door. Mom, please, lower your voice. I will check the bank settings. It was probably just a fraud alert. Don't touch me, she snapped, jerking away. Her sudden movement knocked her open handbag off the edge of the desk. The contents spilled across the plush gray carpet. A tube of lipstick, a heavy Bible, a bottle of prescription pills, and a thick wad of crumpled papers. Bernice gasped and dropped to her knees to scramble for her things. No, leave it alone, I will get it. But my instincts were faster. I am a forensic accountant. My brain is trained to spot anomalies in milliseconds. As I knelt to help her, my eyes locked onto the papers she was frantically trying to cover with her hand. They weren't just grocery receipts. I saw the distinct yellow carbon copy of a wire transfer slip. And underneath that, a pawn shop ticket dated 3 days ago. Time seemed to slow down. The forensic part of my brain took a snapshot. I saw the amount on the wire transfer, $9,000. That was just under the $10,000 threshold that triggers an automatic federal report. That is a classic structuring technique used by money launderers. I also saw the recipient's name, or at least the first few letters of the LLC before she snatched it away. It started with H-U-N, Hunter, and the pawn shop ticket. It was for a vintage Rolex. My father's Rolex, the one he claimed was in the safe deposit box. I realized then that Bernice wasn't just spending my money, she was funneling cash. She was liquidating family assets and moving the funds somewhere else, likely to cover Hunter's gambling debts or something even darker. Jada, Bernice yelled, shoving the papers back into her bag and zipping it shut. Stop staring at me and fix the card. I stood up slowly. The shame I felt from my colleagues' stares was gone, replaced by the cold, hard thrill of the hunt. I had them. They were getting sloppy. I went to my computer and typed in a few commands. I pretended to be flustered, playing the part of the dutiful, intimidated daughter. I am sorry, Mom, I said, my voice trembling just enough to sell it. I see the error. I set the daily spending limit too low by mistake. I am removing the cap right now. It should work instantly. Bernice stood up, dusting off her knees. She sniffed, composing herself as if the tantrum had never happened. Well, good. See that it doesn't happen again. I have a reputation to uphold, even if you do not care about yours. She grabbed her bag and marched out, stopping briefly at Sarah's desk to glare at her. When she was gone, the silence rushed back into the room. I could feel the eyes of the entire firm on my back. My boss, a stern man named Robert, walked past my glass door. He paused, looked at me with a mixture of pity and concern, and kept walking. I didn't care. Let them think I was the weak daughter of a domineering mother. Let them think I was a doormat. I sat back down in my leather chair and unmuted the call with the FBI. I apologize for the interruption, gentlemen, I said, my voice steady and icy. A minor family emergency. Now let's get back to those hidden assets. As I spoke to the agents, my hands were already opening a new window on my screen. I pulled up the state business registry. I typed in the letters I had seen on the receipt. HUNT. There it was. Hunt Holdings LLC, registered in Florida 2 months ago. I opened my personal banking portal. I navigated to the credit card activity for the card Bernice held. I didn't just raise the limit. I activated a dormant feature called Level 3 Data Processing. It wouldn't just tell me the total amount she spent. It would tell me exactly what she bought down to the SKU number. If she wanted to buy a dress, fine. But if she tried to buy prepaid Visa gift cards or withdraw cash at the register, which is a common way to wash money, I would get an alert instantly. My mother had come to my office to humiliate me. She wanted to remind me that no matter how high I climbed in this tower, she could still drag me down. She thought she had won because she walked out with a working credit card. She didn't realize that by dropping her bag, she had just handed me the smoking gun. She wasn't just a toxic parent anymore. In my eyes, and soon in the eyes of the law, she was a suspect. And I was the auditor who was going to close her file permanently. The dinner table had become a stage for Hunter's ego, and my parents were his most devoted audience. By the time the main course was served, Hunter had consumed 3 glasses of my vintage Pinot Noir, and his speech had taken on the sloppy, overconfident cadence of a man who believes he is the smartest person in the room. He leaned back in my chair, swirling the wine glass with a pretentiousness that made my teeth ache. "You know, Jada," he said, pointing a fork at me, "the problem with your line of work is that it is reactionary. You are looking at money that has already moved. You are a historian of finance. Real wealth is made by predicting the future. It is about leverage." My father Desmond nodded vigorously, cutting his steak with enthusiasm. "That is profound, son. Leverage. Jada, are you listening? Hunter understands how the economy actually works. You could learn something if you put down your little calculator." I slowly chewed a piece of broccoli, forcing myself to swallow the urge to laugh. I wanted to tell them that leverage was exactly why Hunter had a credit score in the low 500s. I wanted to tell them that the only thing Hunter predicted was which team would cover the spread on Sunday Night Football. But I stayed silent. I was the investigator, and investigators let the subject talk until they hang themselves. "You should let me manage your portfolio." Jada Hunter continued, his eyes glassy. "I have been looking into some emerging markets in Southeast Asia. High risk, high reward. A conservative bean counter like you is losing money every day by letting it sit in mutual funds. Hand it over to me. I will double it in 6 months." Bernice clapped her hands together. "Oh, Jada, that is a wonderful offer. Hunter is offering to help you for free. You should be grateful. Family helping family." I looked at Hunter. I saw the desperation behind his arrogance. He needed access to my capital because his own wells had run dry. "I will think about it, Hunter," I said, my voice flat. After dinner, the performance moved to the kitchen. My parents and Ebony retired to the living room to watch a reality show, leaving me to clear the table. I was stacking plates into the dishwasher when I felt a presence behind me. The air suddenly smelled of expensive cologne and stale wine. Hunter was standing too close, much too close. I moved to step aside, but he planted his hand on the granite countertop, effectively trapping me between his body and the sink. "You are so uptight, Jada," he murmured, his voice dropping to a low, suggestive register that made my skin crawl. "You need to relax. That is your problem. You have no man, no release. You are just a ball of stress walking around in a pencil skirt." "Excuse me?" I said, gripping a dirty knife tightly in my hand, keeping it below the counterline. "You are in my personal space. Move." Hunter laughed, a wet, breathy sound. He leaned in closer, his chest brushing against my shoulder. "You know you are actually much more attractive than Ebony, she is pretty sure. But you have got that fire. I like a woman who is difficult. It makes breaking her more fun." My stomach churned. This was the man my parents practically worshipped. This was the Christian gentleman they wanted me to emulate. He was a predator drunk on my wine and his own delusion. I looked him dead in the eye. If you do not step back in the next 2 seconds, Hunter, I will break your fingers. And I will do it with a smile. He blinked, surprised by the venom in my tone. Before he could respond, his phone, which he had left sitting face up on the kitchen island, lit up with a notification. The screen was bright in the dim kitchen. I looked past his shoulder and saw it clearly. It wasn't a text from a business partner. It wasn't a text from a broker. The contact name was simply Wifey Florida. The message read, "The kids are asking when Daddy is coming home. You said you would deposit the cash by Friday." My heart stopped for a beat, then restarted with the thudding rhythm of victory. Wifey. Not mistress. Not girlfriend. Wifey. Hunter followed my gaze. He saw the notification. Panic flashed across his face, instantly sobering him up. He snatched the phone off the counter and shoved it into his pocket, stepping back from me as if he had been burned. Just then, Bernice walked into the kitchen holding her empty wine glass. "Hunter," she called out cheerfully, "come pour your mother-in-law a little more of that delicious red, and tell me more about that investment idea." Hunter spun around, his predatory grin instantly replaced by the mask of the dutiful son-in-law. "Of course, Mom," he said, his voice smooth and charming. "I was just telling Jada how lucky I am to be marrying into such a supportive family. She was giving me some great advice on the wedding flowers." He walked past me, patting my shoulder in a brotherly way, as if he hadn't just sexually harassed me 30 seconds ago, as if he wasn't hiding a secret family in another state. I stood by the sink, listening to them laugh in the living room. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking, not from fear but from adrenaline. He had a wife in Florida. He had kids. He was committing bigamy. I didn't just have a financial trail anymore, I had a nuclear bomb. And I was going to wait for the perfect moment to detonate it. I rinsed the last plate, turned off the faucet, and smiled. The hunter had just become the prey. The basement had become my bunker. While my family paraded around the upper floors of my home like royalty, drinking my wine and planning a wedding they could not afford, I was underground, surrounded by boxes and the low hum of my server rack. It was Friday afternoon, 3 days into the occupation, and the tension in the house was palpable. I had spent the last 6 hours reconstructing a complex money trail for a client, spreading sensitive financial documents across the small folding table I was forced to use as a desk. These were original bank statements and affidavits that were crucial for an upcoming court case. One spilled drop of liquid could ruin weeks of forensic work. I needed a break. My eyes were burning from staring at spreadsheets, and my coffee mug was empty. I checked the surveillance feed on my laptop one last time. The house seemed quiet. My parents were out meeting with the florist, and Hunter was presumably at the golf course pretending to be a member. Ebony was napping in my master bedroom. The coast was clear. I slipped upstairs to the kitchen to refill my coffee. I was gone for exactly 8 minutes. As I was pouring the dark roast into my mug, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a motion alert from the basement camera. My heart skipped a beat. I pulled out my phone and tapped the notification. The live feed loaded instantly, showing my makeshift office in high-definition black and white. Ebony was down there. She wasn't just looking for me. She was prowling. She was wearing a silk robe that I recognized as one of mine, missing from my closet, and holding a large glass of green detox juice. I watched on the small screen as she rifled through my boxes, tossing my college yearbooks and tax returns onto the floor with a sneer. She wasn't looking for nostalgia. She was looking for money. I watched her stop in front of the built-in bookshelf. She pulled away a row of old encyclopedias, revealing the small digital safe I had installed years ago. It wasn't my main safe that was hidden behind a false panel in the utility room, but this one contained a few $1,000s in emergency cash and some old jewelry. Ebony's eyes lit up. I could see the greed wash over her face, even through the grainy camera feed. She set her juice down on my work table right next to the stack of critical affidavits. She punched in a code. 4 digits. I knew exactly what she typed. Her birthday. The red light flashed. Denied. She tried again. Mom's birthday. Denied. She tried a third time. Dad's birthday. Denied. I stood in the kitchen gripping my phone watching my sister try to rob me in my own house. She kicked the safe in frustration, letting out a silent scream that the microphone picked up as a distorted scratch. Then her phone rang. She answered it on speaker, her voice echoing in the small basement room. "Girl, you will not believe this," she said, leaning back against my desk. The signal was crisp. I could hear every word. "I am in the dungeon. That is what we call the basement where Jada is sleeping. I am trying to find some cash. This wedding is bleeding me dry and Hunter is being so stingy." I turned up the volume on my phone, holding it to my ear like a lifeline. The voice on the other end was one of her bridesmaids, a girl named Tiffany, who was just as shallow as Ebony. Tiffany asked about the rehearsal dinner. "It is going to be fabulous," Ebony bragged, twirling a lock of hair. "But honestly, I just want this over with. I need access to his accounts. He keeps saying his assets are tied up in offshore investments, but once we are married, I get spousal access. I am going to upgrade my car the day we get back from the honeymoon." Then came the pivot. The conversation shifted and Ebony's voice dropped lower, conspiratorial and venomous. "But honestly, Tiff, I do not know how I am going to stomach the honeymoon. He is so gross. Have you seen the way he eats? And his breath always smells like stale bourbon. I have to close my eyes and pretend he is Tyrell just to let him touch me." Tyrell, her ex-boyfriend from college. The one who worked as a personal trainer and had zero ambition, but according to Ebony, was the love of her life. Tiffany laughed on the other end. "Well, girl, you secure that bag? Fake it until you make it." "I am faking it all right," Ebony scoffed. She paused, looking around the room to ensure she was alone. She didn't know the smoke detector above her head was recording every syllable. "There is something else," she whispered. "You cannot tell a soul. Not even your mom." I held my breath in the kitchen. "I am late," Ebony said. Tiffany shrieked. "Late? You mean pregnant?" "Oh my God, Ebony. That is perfect. A baby secures the bag forever. Hunter will never leave you now." Ebony let out a dark, cynical laugh. "Yeah, that is the plan. Hunter is so excited. He thinks his swimmers are Olympic level. He is already talking about naming the boy Hunter Jr." She paused again, the silence stretching out. "But the math does not add up, Tiff." My blood ran cold. I was with Tyrell that weekend in Miami. You know, when I told Hunter I was at a yoga retreat, it was Tyrell, and we were not doing yoga. I watched the screen stunned. My sister wasn't just a gold digger, she was committing paternity fraud. She was planning to pass off another man's child as the heir to a fortune that didn't even exist. "So it is," Tyrell's Tiffany whispered. 100%, Ebony said. "But Tyrell is broke. He cannot buy me a house in the suburbs. Hunter can. So this baby is going to be light-skinned enough to pass, and by the time anyone notices the nose shape, I will have the ring, the house, and the alimony secured." I lowered the phone slowly. This was it. This was the nail in the coffin. Not only was Hunter a bigamist, but Ebony was pregnant with another man's child. This marriage was built on a foundation of lies so deep they were practically in the earth's core. On the screen, Ebony finished her call. She looked down at the table where she had been leaning. She finally noticed the papers she was resting her hand on. She picked up the top sheet. It was a forensic audit report of a shell company marked with red ink and highlighters. "Forensic audit," she read aloud, her brow furrowing. She flipped through the pages. She saw the complexity. She saw the professionalism. She saw the evidence of a career she always mocked but secretly envied. She looked at the papers, then at the safe she couldn't open. The jealousy on her face twisted into something ugly and childish. She picked up her glass of green detox juice. It was thick, slimy, and full of spinach and kale. "Oops," she whispered to the empty room. She tilted the glass. I watched in horror as the thick green sludge poured out over my documents. It soaked into the bank statements. It pooled over the affidavits. It ruined the ink, turning precise numbers into blurry, illegible stains. She didn't stop until the glass was empty. She dropped the glass on top of the soggy mess, wiped her hands on her robe, and turned to leave. I realized this wasn't just vandalism. This was hate. Pure, unadulterated resentment for the fact that I had built something real while she was building a house of cards. I waited for her to come up the stairs. I moved away from the kitchen, retreating to the living room so she wouldn't suspect I had seen her. When she walked past me a minute later, she was smiling. "Hey sis," she said, sweet as pie. "Just went down to check on you, but you weren't there. It smells a little musty down there. You should really light a candle." I looked at her. I looked at her stomach where a secret was growing that would destroy her life. I looked at her hands which had just destroyed my work. I didn't scream. I didn't slap her. "Thanks for checking on me," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I will go down and clean up." I walked down to the basement. The smell of kale and wet paper hit me instantly. The sight of the ruined documents made my stomach lurch. That was 40 hours of billing time. That was evidence for a trial. But as I looked up at the blinking red light of the smoke detector, I realized the trade-off. She had destroyed a few $100s worth of paper, but she had given me a recording worth millions. She had given me the truth about the baby. I carefully picked up the soggy papers and threw them in the trash. Then I sat down at my laptop, rewound the footage, and saved the clip to 3 different hard drives. I labeled the file simply, "The Baby Trap." Ebony thought she had won this round because she made a mess. She didn't realize that in my world, mess is just evidence waiting to be analyzed. And I had just gathered enough evidence to bury her. The house above me was silent, a mausoleum of lies built on a foundation of debt and delusion. It was 3 in the morning, the witching hour for most, but for a forensic accountant, this was the golden hour. While my family slept in the beds, I paid for dreaming of a wedding, funded by money they did not have. I was awake in the basement, bathing in the cool blue glow of 3 high-definition monitors. I had spent the last 2 hours building a digital cage, and now I was ready to lock the door. I started with my father. Desmond liked to present himself as a pillar of the community, a shepherd leading his flock at New Hope Baptist Church. He preached about stewardship and financial responsibility, thundering from the pulpit about the evils of greed. I pulled up the public property records for the church. It was a matter of public record, accessible to anyone who knew where to look, yet no one ever looked. People trusted their pastor. That was their mistake. I navigated to the County Recorder of Deeds website. My fingers flew across the keyboard, executing a title search on the church building itself, a historic brick structure that had been fully paid off by the congregation 10 years ago. Or so everyone thought. The screen refreshed, and there it was, a lien. My heart didn't break. It hardened. 6 months ago, a second mortgage had been taken out on the church property. The amount was staggering. $400,000. The signature on the loan documents was unmistakable. Reverend Desmond Williams. I opened a second window, accessing the church's filed tax returns and the operating accounts that I had access to from a pro bono audit I had done for them years ago. I still had the administrator passwords. I shouldn't have used them, legally speaking, but the statute of limitations on my morality had expired the moment my mother slapped me. I traced the loan disbursement. The money hit the church's capital improvement fund on a Tuesday. By Thursday, it was gone. It hadn't gone to roof repairs or the new soup kitchen my father had promised the deacons. I followed the wire transfer numbers like a bloodhound tracking a scent. The funds were funneled into a shell entity called Divine Consulting Group. It sounded legitimate, religious even. But when I pulled the articles of incorporation for Divine Consulting, the registered agent wasn't a contractor or an architect. It was a P.O. box in downtown Chicago. I ran a cross-reference on the P.O. box against my family's personal records. It matched the billing address for a specialized credit card, Ebony's credit card. I sat back in my chair, the hum of the computer servers, the only sound in the room. My father had mortgaged the house of God to pay for his daughter's vanity. I pulled up the statements for Divine Consulting. The $400,000 hadn't been invested, it had been incinerated. First-class flights to Milan, a leased Porsche Cayenne, designer handbags, VIP tables at clubs, and most damning of all, a series of cash withdrawals amounting to $50,000 labeled simply as wedding venue hold. They were stealing from the offering plate to fund a party. My father wasn't just a bad parent, he was an embezzler. He was looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison for fraud. I saved every document, every digital footprint into a folder I named the Judas File. Then I turned my attention to Hunter. If my parents were criminals out of desperation and love for their golden child, Hunter was a criminal out of pure parasitic necessity. I had his name, his date of birth, and the knowledge of his secret LLC in Florida. That was all I needed to peel back his skin. I logged into a subscription-based background check service used by private investigators. I punched in Hunt Holdings LLC. The corporate status was active, but the financials were a disaster. The company had zero revenue. It was a ghost ship. But what caught my eye was the litigation history. Hunter Vance was a defendant in 3 separate civil lawsuits in Miami-Dade County. I pulled the court dockets. Plaintiff 1, the Mirage Casino and Resort. Amount owed $85,000. Plaintiff 2, a private lending firm that specialized in high-risk, high-interest loans, essentially legalized loan sharks. Amount owed $120,000. Plaintiff 3, Sarah Vance. I paused. I clicked on the filing for Sarah Vance versus Hunter Vance. It wasn't a business dispute. It was a petition for child support enforcement. I read the filing. Sarah was his wife, legally. There was no divorce decree on file. The document stated that Hunter had abandoned the marital home 6 months ago, claiming he was going to Chicago for a business opportunity that would pay off all their debts. He had left her with 2 children, ages 4 and 2, and a mountain of unpaid bills. I looked at the dates. He had met Ebony 3 months after fleeing Florida. He hadn't fallen in love with my sister. He had targeted her. He saw a girl who projected wealth, whose family looked established, and he latched on like a tick, hoping to use her, or rather my money, to pay off the sharks who were undoubtedly threatening to break his legs. I dug deeper into his recent transactions. I found a series of frantic emails linked to his cloud account, which had a pitifully weak password. Subject: Final warning. Body: you have until the 15th, Vance. If the wire doesn't hit, we send someone to pay you a visit. Chicago isn't that far. The 15th. That was the day after the wedding. The picture was now complete, and it was terrified in its clarity. My parents were drowning, having sacrificed their morality and their freedom to keep Ebony afloat. Ebony was pregnant by another man, trapping a husband she despised to maintain an image. And Hunter was a desperate con man on the run from the mob, marrying Ebony solely to get access to the dowry he thought my parents were providing. They were a circle of drowning swimmers, each trying to climb on top of the other to breathe, and I was the only life raft. I looked at the clock. It was 4:15 in the morning. My eyes were dry, burning with fatigue, but my mind was razor sharp. I had them. I had them all. I wasn't just going to stop the wedding. I was going to dismantle their lives with the precision of a surgeon. I began to compile the master presentation. I dragged the video of the assault, the audio of Ebony's confession, the church mortgage documents, and Hunter's marriage license into a single password-protected slideshow. I formatted the slides. I adjusted the contrast on the screenshots of the bank transfers so the red negative numbers popped against the white background. I wanted the people in the back row to see the zeros clearly. As the sun began to creep through the small basement window, casting a pale gray light across my desk, I finished the final slide. It was a simple black screen with white text. Eviction notice. I closed my laptop. Upstairs, I heard the first creak of floorboards. The house was waking up. My mother would be expecting me to make breakfast soon. My father would be practicing his toast for the rehearsal dinner. Hunter would be checking his phone, terrified of the men coming for him. Let them have their morning coffee. Let them have their false sense of security. I had the paper trail, and ink is more permanent than blood. The audit was closed. The judgment was coming. The sun had not yet risen, casting the basement in a heavy gray gloom that matched the pit in my stomach. I had been awake for 24 hours, fueled only by black coffee and the terrifying adrenaline of discovery. On the monitors before me, the house was beginning to stir. I expected to see my family going through their usual morning routine of vanity and selfishness. I expected my mother to complain about the coffee brand I bought. I expected my sister to spend an hour in the mirror. What I did not expect was to witness a conspiracy so vile, it made their previous financial crimes look like petty theft. The camera in the sunroom flickered to life. It was a secluded part of the house, far from the basement door, which is exactly why they chose it. My father, Desmond, was sitting in my favorite armchair holding a steaming mug. My mother, Bernice, was pacing back and forth, her face tight with anxiety. Ebony was curled up on the love seat, scrolling through her phone, looking bored. I put on my noise-canceling headphones and turned the volume on the surveillance feed all the way up. The microphone I had hidden in the potted fern picked up their whispers with chilling clarity. "We have to move quickly after the ceremony," my father said, his voice low and serious. "Hunter is getting impatient. The creditors are calling him every hour. If we do not get access to substantial capital within a week, this entire house of cards collapses." Bernice stopped pacing. She looked out the window at the garden she did not own. "Jada has tightened the purse strings," she hissed. "She is watching every penny now. I tried to transfer funds from her checking account yesterday, and I was locked out. She is suspicious." Ebony looked up from her phone. "So what do we do?" "We cannot uninvited people. The wedding is in 2 days. If I do not have that reception, I am ruined." Desmond leaned forward. "We are not canceling the wedding. We are going to secure our future. But we need to think bigger than just Jada's bank account. We need the trust." My blood froze in my veins. The trust. They were talking about the Maya Education Trust. When my husband David died 4 years ago in a car accident, he left behind a $5 million life insurance policy. I had placed every single cent of it into an irrevocable trust for our daughter Maya. It was untouchable. It was meant for her college, her first home, her future. I never touched it. I lived off my own salary. I had never told them the exact amount, but they knew it existed. Bernice nodded slowly. "The control of the trust falls to the legal guardian of the child. If Jada were to become incapacitated or deemed unfit to parent, the guardianship would fall to the next of kin. That would be us." I stopped breathing. I pressed the headphones tighter against my ears, praying I was hallucinating. Ebony laughed, a cruel, dismissive sound. "You really think a judge is going to hand over custody to you guys? You are old, and Jada is Miss Perfect Professional." Desmond smiled, and it was the smile of a wolf looking at a lamb. "That is why we have to help the narrative along. Look at her lately. She is erratic. She is aggressive. She attacked your mother just a few days ago. We have witnesses. Hunter saw it. You saw it. He was rewriting history. He was taking the assault he committed against me and flipping the script." Bernice picked up the thread instantly. "We can testify that she has been having a breakdown since David died. We can say she has been violent towards Maya. We can say she is a danger to herself and the child. I have friend in social services. If I make a call expressing concern, they will open a file." Ebony sat up, interested now. "So if Jada gets committed for a psychiatric evaluation, you get Maya, and we get control of the assets to ensure the child is provided for." Desmond finished. "As trustees, we could authorize emergency withdrawals for housing and living expenses. We could pay off the church mortgage. We could pay off Hunter's debts. We could live comfortably for the rest of our lives." I stared at the screen, my hands trembling so violently I could barely hold the mouse. They were not just planning to steal my money, they were planning to steal my daughter. They were plotting to have me thrown into a mental institution, stripped of my freedom and my motherhood, just so they could drain my dead husband's legacy to fund their lies. Ebony inspected her fingernails. I do not want to take care of the kid, though. Maya is annoying. Bernice waved her hand dismissively. You would not have to. We will hire a nanny with the trust money, or send her to boarding school in Switzerland. The point is, we get the power of attorney. Boarding school. They were going to ship my 7-year-old daughter across the ocean just to get her out of the way. Desmond stood up looking satisfied. It is the only way. Jada has become a liability. She is ungrateful and hard-hearted. Scripture says to honor thy father and mother. She has failed to do that. We are simply correcting her path. Correcting my path. By destroying my life. I took the headphones off and laid them gently on the desk. A strange calm washed over me. It was the calm of a soldier who has run out of ammunition and picked up a knife. Up until this moment, I had been playing defense. I had been gathering evidence to protect my finances and maybe eventually get a restraining order. I had viewed them as thieves, but they were not thieves. They were kidnappers. They were monsters. I looked at the picture of Maya that sat on my desk. She was smiling, holding David's hand in a park months before he died. That trust fund was the last thing David gave her. It was his promise that she would always be safe, and they wanted to turn it into a slush fund for luxury cars and gambling debts. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and angry. I wiped it away. That was the last tear I would shed for this family. The timeline had changed. I couldn't wait until after the wedding. I couldn't risk them making that call to social services. If they filed a report, even a false one, it would create a record. It would give them leverage. I had to strike first, and I had to strike so hard that they would never be able to stand up again. I opened a new browser window. I typed in the name of the best family law attorney in Chicago, a woman known as the Shark. I had her personal cell number from a previous case. I sent a text. Emergency. I have video evidence of a conspiracy to commit custodial interference and fraud. I need an emergency ex parte hearing, today. Then I opened the file containing the recording of their conversation. I labeled it the smoking gun. I looked up at the ceiling, listening to their footsteps above my head. They were walking towards the kitchen, probably discussing breakfast. They had no idea that the floor beneath them was not just wood and concrete. It was a trapdoor, and I had just pulled the lever. They wanted to paint me as crazy fine. I would show them exactly what a mother is capable of when her cub is threatened. I would burn their reputation to ash. I would strip them of their titles, their freedom, and their dignity. I stood up and walked to the mirror in the corner of the basement. I looked at the scar on my cheek from my mother's ring. It was healing, turning a pale pink. You wanted a war, Mother, I whispered to the empty room. You just got a massacre. I turned back to my computer. It was time to prepare the final exhibit. The wedding rehearsal was tonight, and I was going to give a toast that would end the world. I slipped out of the house just after noon, under the pretense of running a frantic errand for the florist. The air inside my home had become toxic, thick with the invisible fumes of my family's betrayal. Stepping into the cool Chicago air felt like surfacing from a deep, murky lake. I drove downtown, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wasn't going to a flower shop. I was going to a fortress. My destination was a glass skyscraper on Walker Drive, home to the law firm of Sterling and Hart. This was where I kept my real life, the life my parents knew nothing about. When I walked into the conference room on the 35th floor, 2 women were waiting for me. They were the only 2 people in the world who knew the full extent of my assets and the depth of my scars. One was Catherine, my attorney. She was a razor-sharp woman in a tailored navy suit who had never lost a case. The other was Great Aunt Mercy. Aunt Mercy was 80 years old, the matriarch of our extended family, and the only person my father actually feared. She sat in a leather wingback chair, holding a cup of tea, her eyes sharp and observant behind her wire-rimmed glasses. To the rest of the family, Mercy was just a quiet old woman who lived on a fixed income. They didn't know that she was the silent investor who had helped me start my forensic accounting firm 10 years ago. They didn't know she was a millionaire in her own right, having quietly invested in real estate decades before gentrification swept the city. When Mercy saw me, she didn't say a word. She just stood up and opened her arms. I walked into her embrace, and for the first time since the slap, I crumbled. I didn't cry loudly. It was a silent, shaking release of tension. I buried my face in her shoulder, smelling the familiar scent of lavender and old paper. "I am sorry, Auntie," I whispered. "I am so sorry. I should have stopped this sooner." Mercy pulled back and held my face in her hands. Her thumbs traced the fading scratch on my cheek. "Do not you apologize for surviving Jada. You are not the one who sinned. They broke the covenant of family, not you." "I saw the video you sent us." I nodded, wiping my eyes. I took a seat at the long mahogany table. Catherine slid a heavy file folder toward me. It made a solid, decisive thud against the wood. "We have prepared everything," Catherine said, her voice calm and professional. "Based on the surveillance footage and the financial records you uploaded, we have a nuclear arsenal." She opened the file. The first document was a restraining order. "This is based on the assault and the conspiracy to commit custodial interference," Catherine explained. "Once the judge signs this, which he will within the hour, your parents and sister will not be allowed within 500 feet of you or Maya. If they violate it, they go straight to jail." She flipped the page. The second document was an eviction notice. "Since you own the mortgage on their home through your LLC, and they have defaulted on the last 3 payments, you have the right to immediate possession. We are skipping the usual grace period because of the criminal intent proven in your recordings. We will post this on their front door tomorrow. When they go home after the wedding fiasco, their keys will not work." Then came the third document. It was the heaviest of all. A draft indictment for fraud and embezzlement. "This is for the church funds," Catherine said. "We have traced the $400,000 directly to Ebony's wedding vendors and Hunter's debts. This is grand larceny and wire fraud. Your father will be stripped of his pastoral license. He will likely face 5 to 10 years. Your mother, as a signatory, is an accomplice." I looked at the papers. These weren't just legal documents. They were death certificates for the people who raised me. I felt a wave of nausea. It is a terrible thing to destroy your own bloodline even when it is necessary. "Are we sure?" I asked, my voice small. "Is there no other way? Maybe if I just threatened them with this, they would back down. Maybe I can just make them leave." Aunt Mercy leaned forward. Her eyes were hard as flint. "Jada, listen to me. You are thinking like a daughter. You need to think like a mother." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I heard what they said on that tape." Mercy said, her voice low and fierce. "They want to put you in a mental institution. They want to ship Maya to a boarding school so they can drive cars they didn't earn. That is not a mistake. That is evil. If you show them mercy today, they will come back tomorrow with a sharper knife. You have to cut the rot out, completely." I thought of Maya. I thought of the way she flinched when Hunter walked into a room. I thought of my husband David and how hard he worked to build that trust for her. "You are right," I said, my spine straightening. "I can't let them near her. Ever again." Catherine nodded. "Then we proceed with the plan. We serve them at the rehearsal dinner." "No," I said, a new idea forming in my mind. The forensic accountant in me saw a way to maximize the impact. "We don't just serve them papers, we expose them. If we just hand them envelopes, they will lie about it later. They will spin a story to the church that I am vindictive. They will play the victim." I looked at Catherine. "I need the police there, but not just for protection. I need them there to arrest Hunter." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "For the bigamy." "For the bigamy," I confirmed. "And for the fraud. I want him in handcuffs before the dessert is served. And I want the eviction notice projected on the screen where the slideshow is supposed to be. I want the entire congregation to see exactly who their shepherd is." Mercy smiled, a small, grim expression of approval. Let the truth be the light, she said. We spent the next hour finalizing the details. We arranged for private security to be at the perimeter of the garden. We coordinated with the detective in charge of the financial crimes unit who had been investigating Hunter separately. As I signed the final affidavit, I felt a strange sensation. The fear was gone. The guilt was gone. In their place was a cold, steely resolve. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was the executioner. Mercy walked me to the elevator. She hugged me one last time. Wear the red dress tonight, she whispered. The one you bought in Paris. You are not a servant in your own house, Jada. You are the queen. Dress like one. I stepped into the elevator and watched the doors close. I was going back to the war zone. I was going back to the insults, the demands, and the lies. But this time I was walking in with a loaded gun hidden in my smile. The preparations were done. The allies were in place. The trap was set. All that was left was to spring it. The sun was beginning to set on the evening before the rehearsal dinner, casting long, bloody shadows across the backyard. The house was buzzing with frantic energy as the caterers arrived to set up the tent, but I had retreated to the patio with Maya. It was the only place where the air didn't feel recycled by the lungs of liars. Maya was sitting on the grass playing with Barnaby, our 12-year-old golden retriever mix. Barnaby was the only male figure Maya had known since her father died. He was slow, arthritic, and possessed a heart made of pure marshmallow. He was currently lying on his back, letting Maya weave dandelions into his fur, his tail thumping a gentle rhythm against the earth. Hunter was pacing on the terrace above us, shouting into his cell phone. I knew exactly who he was talking to. The loan sharks were calling. I could hear the tremor in his voice, the desperate promises of money he didn't have. He slammed the phone down on the glass table and looked around, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He needed a target. He needed something to hurt because he was terrified of being hurt himself. Barnaby, sensing the tension, rolled over and let out a low, inquisitive woof. It wasn't aggressive. It was the sound of an old dog asking if everything was okay. Hunter snapped. "Shut up!" he screamed, his face twisting into a mask of unadulterated rage. "Shut that mongrel up!" Barnaby struggled to his feet, his tail still wagging uncertainly. He took a few steps toward Hunter, likely thinking the man wanted attention. "No, Barnaby, stay," I called out, sensing the danger. But I was too slow. Hunter didn't step back. He stepped forward. With a violence that made the world stop spinning, he drew back his leg and kicked Barnaby. The sound was sickening. It was the wet, dull crunch of bones snapping under the force of an expensive Italian leather loafer. Barnaby didn't bark. He screamed. It was a high-pitched human sound of agony that I will never forget as long as I live. My dog was lifted off the ground by the impact, landing in a heap on the flagstones, thrashing and yelping, his back leg dangling at a horrifying angle. Mommy Maya shrieked. It was a sound of pure terror. She threw herself toward the dog, tears instantly exploding from her eyes. I was across the patio in a heartbeat. I dropped to my knees beside Barnaby, my hands hovering over his broken body, afraid to touch him and cause more pain. He looked at me with wide, confused eyes, panting rapidly, licking my hand between whimpers. I looked up at Hunter. He was standing there, adjusting his blazer, breathing hard. He didn't look remorseful. He looked relieved. He had just transferred his pain onto an innocent creature. "You monster!" I whispered, my voice trembling with a rage so potent it felt like poison. "You kicked him. You broke his leg." Hunter scoffed, looking down at us with disdain. He tried to bite me. I was defending myself. "Did you see that, Desmond?" He lunged at me. My parents had rushed out onto the patio at the sound of the scream. They stood there looking at their granddaughter sobbing over her injured pet, and then they looked at their golden son-in-law. My father, the man of God, the shepherd, looked at the suffering animal and shrugged. "He is an old dog, Jada," Desmond said, his voice devoid of empathy. "He probably has rabies or something." Hunter did what any man would do. "You should have put that beast down years ago. Put him down!" I screamed, standing up. My hands were balled into fists. He was wagging his tail. He is 12 years old. Hunter attacked him. Bernice stepped between me and Hunter, her hand raised as if to slap me again. Lower your voice, Jada. The neighbors will hear you. Do not ruin this weekend. Hunter is under a lot of pressure. He didn't mean to hurt the dog. He just moved him out of the way. Moved him. I pointed at Barnaby's shattered leg. Look at that. That is a fracture. Stop being so dramatic, Bernice hissed. It is just a dog, a filthy animal. We can get Maya a new one. A purebred. Something that matches the house better. Now get that thing out of here before the caterers see it. It is unsanitary. I looked at them. I looked at the three people who shared my DNA standing in a unified front of cruelty. They didn't care. They truly didn't care. To them, Barnaby was just an object, just like I was, an ATM, and just like Maya was a trust fund check. I looked at the heavy crystal vase on the patio table. For one blinding second, I wanted to pick it up and smash it across Hunter's face. I wanted to make him feel the pain he had just inflicted. I wanted to tear them all apart with my bare hands. The violence surged through my veins, hot and seductive. I took a step toward the table. Hunter flinched. He saw the murder in my eyes. But then I felt a small hand grip my jeans. "Mommy, please help him." Maya sobbed. "He is hurting." I looked down at my daughter. If I attacked Hunter now, the police would come. I would be arrested for assault. They would use it as proof of my mental instability. They would get custody. They would win. I had to swallow the fire. It burned my throat. It charred my insides. But I swallowed it. I took a deep breath, forcing my hands to unclench. "Get out of my sight," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "All of you, go inside. Now." Hunter let out a nervous laugh. "Come on, Jada. Don't be crazy." I took a step toward him, and this time the look on my face made him stumble back. "I said go inside." Desmond huffed, straightening his tie. "Fine. Let's go, Hunter. She is in one of her moods. We have a toast to practice anyway." They turned and walked back into the house, stepping over the spot where my dog's blood stained the stone. They didn't look back. They laughed as they closed the sliding glass door, sealing themselves back into their bubble of delusion. I gently lifted Barnaby into my arms. He was heavy, and he cried out in pain, but he trusted me. I carried him to the car with Maya running behind me, holding the door open. We drove to the emergency vet in silence. Maya sat in the back seat, her hand on Barnaby's head, whispering prayers she had learned in Sunday school. I drove with one hand on the wheel and one hand on my phone, dialing the private number of the detective I had met with earlier. "This is Jada," I said when he answered. "Add animal cruelty to the list of charges. Class 4 felony. I have the vet report coming in an hour." I hung up. The vet confirmed that Barnaby's femur was shattered. He needed surgery and a steel pin, but he would survive. As I sat in the waiting room holding my weeping daughter, I felt the final tether snap. There was no mercy left in me, no hesitation, no lingering wish for reconciliation. They had hurt the only two things in the world that loved me unconditionally. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 9 at night. The rehearsal dinner started in 20 hours. I leaned down and kissed Maya's forehead. "Mommy, why are they so mean?" she asked, her voice small and broken. "They are not just mean, baby," I said softly. "They are finished." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. My reflection stared back at me. I looked different. The fear was gone. The sadness was gone. I looked like a hurricane waiting to make landfall. Let them drink my wine tonight. Let them sleep in my sheets. Let them think they have gotten away with it one last time. I whispered to the glass, my voice barely a breath but heavy with the weight of a final judgment. Tomorrow. It all ends tomorrow. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the Chicago sky in hues of bruised purple and burnt orange. It was the perfect backdrop for a lie. My backyard, the one I had landscaped with my own hands, and money had been transformed into a scene from a bridal magazine. White silk tents rippled in the gentle breeze, and thousands of fairy lights were strung through the ancient oak trees, casting a soft golden glow over the manicured lawn. The air smelled of expensive lilies, and the slow roasted prime rib being prepared by the catering team. It was breathtaking. It was expensive. And it was completely fraudulent. I stood by the entrance to the garden, invisible in the shadows. My mother, Bernice, had been very specific about my attire for the evening. While the guests were instructed to wear summer pastels and linens, to match the garden party theme, she had told me to wear black. Simple, unadorned black. She claimed it was slimming. She claimed it was elegant. But we both knew the truth. She wanted me to blend in with the catering staff. She wanted to ensure that no one mistook me for someone important. In her mind, I was not the hostess. I was the help. I smoothed the fabric of my dress, feeling the cold, hard weight of the flash drive in my pocket. It was the only accessory I needed. The guests began to arrive in a stream of luxury sedans. These were the pillars of my father's world. There were deacons from the church, local council members, and wealthy business owners my parents were desperate to impress. I watched as Desmond and Bernice greeted them at the gate, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch and matriarch to perfection. Desmond was wearing a tuxedo that he had charged to my credit card before I cut him off. He laughed loudly, shaking hands and clapping men on the back. I could hear snippets of their conversation drifting over the jazz music. "Desmond, this place is magnificent," one of the deacons said, gesturing to my house. "I had no idea the Lord had blessed you so abundantly. You have been holding out on us." My father chuckled, a sound that used to make me feel safe, but now made my skin crawl. "Well, the Lord provides for those who walk in his path. We wanted a sanctuary for our family, a place where our children could bring their spouses and feel the comfort of home." He was claiming my house. He was taking credit for the mortgage I paid, the taxes I filed, and the maintenance I oversaw. He was building his reputation on the foundation of my labor. I stepped forward, holding a tray of crystal champagne flutes. A woman I recognized as the choir director turned to me. She didn't look at my face. She just looked at the tray. "Oh, thank you," she said, taking a glass. Then she turned back to my mother. "Bernice, you must be so proud. Ebony looks like an angel. And Hunter comes from such a good family. You have truly done well raising them." I moved away before I could say something that would ruin the surprise. I walked through the crowd, a ghost in my own garden. I saw Hunter holding court near the bar. He was drinking heavily again, his face flushed. He was telling a group of men about his offshore investments, spinning webs of fiction that would have been impressive if they weren't so easily verifiable. I saw the way his eyes darted to the gate every few minutes. He was terrified. He was waiting for a process server or a loan shark to crash the party. He didn't know they were already here. I had positioned the private security team I hired at the perimeter. They were dressed in plain clothes, looking like drivers or additional staff. They weren't there to keep people out. They were there to keep Hunter in. The music faded, and the sound of a spoon chiming against a glass cut through the chatter. My father stood on the raised platform that had been set up for the toasts. He adjusted the microphone, beaming at the crowd. The spotlight hit him, and for a moment he looked exactly like the man I used to adore. He looked powerful. He looked righteous. "Welcome, everyone." Desmond boomed, his voice rich and practiced. "Welcome to our home." The crowd applauded. I stood near the audiovisual booth, my hand hovering near the laptop that controlled the large projection screen behind him. "We are gathered here to celebrate love," Desmond continued. "The love between my beautiful daughter Ebony and her wonderful fiancé Hunter. But we are also here to celebrate family. You know, the Bible tells us that a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children." I clenched my jaw. The audacity was breathtaking. He was stealing my daughter's inheritance to pay for this charade. He went on. "Raising two daughters was not easy. There were trials, there were tribulations. But Bernice and I always prioritized love. We taught them integrity. We taught them that truth is the only path to salvation. And looking at Ebony today, I see the fruit of that labor. She is a woman of virtue, a woman of grace. Ebony sat at the head table preening. She looked beautiful on the outside, but I knew the rot that was growing within her. I knew about the baby. I knew about the lies. And Hunter, my father said, gesturing to the man who had kicked my dog. A son I never had, a man of honor, a man who respects God's creation, a man who respects God's creation. The image of Barnaby's shattered leg flashed in my mind. The sound of his scream echoed in my ears. I looked over at the table where the police officers I had coordinated with were sitting. They were in uniform, but they had been invited under the guise of providing security for the high-profile guests. Desmond thought they were there to protect him. He gave them a nod of acknowledgement from the stage. Desmond raised his glass high. So let us raise a glass to truth, to legacy, and to a love that hides no secrets. The crowd murmured their agreement, raising their glasses, and now Desmond said, checking his watch, "We have prepared a special video tribute, a look back at the journey that brought us here, a celebration of the love that binds this family together." This was it. My father turned to look at the screen. Bernice clapped her hands in anticipation. Hunter leaned back in his chair, looking bored but smug. I stepped into the audio-visual booth. The technician, a young man I had paid $500 to take a break, was nowhere to be seen. It was just me and the mixing board. I looked at my family one last time. They looked so happy. They looked so secure in their stolen kingdom. I plugged in the flash drive. The laptop recognized the device instantly. Folder name, The Truth. File name, Judgment Day. I didn't hesitate. I didn't tremble. I wasn't the scared little girl in the hallway anymore. I was the hand of God, and I was about to flip the table. I pressed enter. The music cut out abruptly. The soft romantic slideshow of Ebony and Hunter's engagement photos did not appear. Instead, the screen went black for a long, heavy second. The crowd fell silent, confused by the technical glitch. My father tapped the microphone nervously. "It seems we have a small technical difficulty," he joked. "Jada, can you check on that?" I picked up a microphone from the booth. My voice boomed across the garden, amplified by the expensive sound system they had forced me to rent. "There is no difficulty, Father," I said. "The video is working perfectly." He squinted into the darkness, trying to find me. "Jada, what are you doing?" "I am doing what you taught me," I said, stepping out of the shadows. "I am celebrating truth, and I am revealing the secrets that bind this family together." I hit the space bar. The screen exploded into light. It wasn't a photo. It was a video. And the first sound that tore through the garden wasn't a love song. It was the sound of a slap. The opening frame froze on the screen. My mother's face twisted in rage, her hand connecting with my cheek. The diamond ring glinting in the light. The blood flying. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the garden. My mother dropped her champagne glass. It shattered on the patio stones, but the sound was swallowed by the audio coming from the speakers. The celebration was over. The trial had begun. The garden fell into a silence so profound that the hum of the projector fan sounded like a jet engine. The image on the screen was massive, 12 feet high and high definition, looming over the guests like a billboard of judgment. It was not the soft-focus, sepia-toned montage of Ebony and Hunter holding hands on a beach that they had paid a videographer $5,000 to produce. It was the raw, unedited security footage from my hallway camera dated just 3 days prior. The angle was wide and unflinching. It captured the expensive art on the walls, the polished floor, and the 4 people standing in the center of the frame. The audio quality was crystal clear, amplified by the speakers positioned in every corner of the yard. "Ungrateful brat," my mother's voice hissed through the garden, the malice in her tone stripping away decades of her carefully cultivated church lady persona in a single second. On the screen, the guests watched as Bernice lunged forward. The impact of the slap was visceral. The sound of her diamond ring striking my cheekbone cracked through the air like a whip. I saw the choir director cover her mouth with her hand. I saw the mayor's wife gasp and clutch her husband's arm. But the video did not stop there. It showed my father, the man who had just preached about love and legacy, slamming his daughter against the wall. "You will write that check," his digital avatar roared. "We will not look like paupers." In the real world, the real Desmond stood on the stage, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He looked at the screen, then at the horrified faces of his deacons, then back at the screen. He lunged for the laptop on the podium, frantically hitting keys, trying to stop the playback. "Turn it off!" he screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "It is a fake! It is AI! Turn it off!" But he had no control. I was in the booth and I had locked the system. The only person who could stop this train was me, and I had cut the brakes. The scene on the screen shifted, a hard cut to the patio bathed in the orange light of sunset. The timestamp in the corner read yesterday. Hunter appeared on screen, pacing, looking agitated. Then the camera captured Barnaby, my sweet, limping dog, approaching him with a wagging tail. The guests watched as Hunter, the man described minutes ago as a protector of God's creation, drew back his leg. The kick was brutal. The sound of the bone snapping was magnified by the subwoofers, a wet, sickening crunch that made several people flinch physically. The scream that followed, the high-pitched, agonizing yelp of the dog, tore through the elegant atmosphere of the party. On the screen, my mother stepped into the frame. "Just a filthy animal," she said. "Get that thing out of here before the caterers see it." The reaction in the garden was instantaneous and volatile. You could hear the shift in the air. These were people who owned purebreds, people who donated to animal shelters to look good. Watching a man kick a helpless elderly dog was a crime that resonated on a primal level. A woman in the front row stood up, knocking her chair over. "That is sick!" she shouted, pointing at Hunter. "You are sick!" Hunter was frozen near the bar. He wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at the guests, watching his social standing evaporate in real time. He held up his hands, shaking his head. "It is out of context," he stammered, though no context in the universe could justify animal cruelty. She edited it. But I wasn't done. The visual evidence of their violence was damaging, but the audio evidence of their deceit was the kill shot. The screen went black for a brief second, and then the grainy night vision footage from the basement appeared. Ebony was leaning against my desk, holding her green juice, looking relaxed and smug. I turned the volume up to the maximum level. "I am in the dungeon." Ebony's voice echoed, dripping with entitlement. The guests listened as she mocked her fiancé. They listened as she called him gross. They listened as she laughed about his breath and his intellect. Hunter stood there, his face draining of color. He was hearing his beautiful bride, the woman he thought he was playing, admit that she despised him. And then came the bomb. "So it is Tyrell's," the voice on the phone asked. 100%, Ebony replied on the screen, twirling her hair. "But Tyrell is broke. This baby is going to be light-skinned enough to pass. By the time anyone notices the nose shape, I will have the ring, the house, and the alimony secured." The silence that followed this statement was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Every eye in the garden turned to Ebony. She was sitting at the head table, her hand frozen halfway to her glass of water. She looked like a statue of terror. Her secret, the one thing she thought would secure her future, was now broadcasting to the very people she needed to fool. Hunter turned slowly to look at her. The realization washed over him. He wasn't the con artist in control. He was the mark. He was the victim of a paternity fraud that was just broadcast to half of Chicago's elite. "You are pregnant," Hunter whispered, his voice carrying in the silent garden. "And it is not mine." Ebony stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the patio stones. "Jada did this," she shrieked, pointing blindly into the darkness. "She is jealous. She faked it. It is a deep fake." But nobody was buying it. The level of detail, the casual cruelty, the specific mention of Tyrell, it was too real. I stepped out of the booth, walking into the light of the projection screen. The image of Ebony confessing played in a loop behind me, a ghostly echo of her own destruction. "It is not a deep fake, Ebony," I said, my voice calm and amplified by the microphone I still held. "It is a confession. And I think we all heard enough." My father ran toward me, his face purple with rage. He looked like he was going to strike me again, right there in front of everyone. "You ruin everything," he screamed, raising his fist. But before he could reach me, a wall of blue uniforms stepped out from the shadows of the hedges. The police officers who had been sitting quietly at the back were on their feet. The guests gasped again as the officers moved into the light. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was a crime scene. I looked at my father, his fist raised frozen in mid-air as he saw the badges. "I didn't ruin anything, Dad," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "I just turned on the lights, and it seems like the roaches are finally scrambling." The video on the screen ended, leaving the logo of my forensic accounting firm glowing in white against a black background. The show was over. The reality had begun. And as I looked at the devastation around me, the shocked guests, the weeping mother, the terrified sister, and the furious father, I felt a peace I hadn't known in 30 years. The truth had set me free, but it had just locked them in a cage of their own making. The silence in the garden was no longer the stunned silence of shock. It had mutated into the heavy, suffocating silence of judgment. The video of the abuse had faded to black, but I was not done. I stood alone in the center of the patio, the microphone heavy in my hand, feeling the eyes of every Deacon business partner and socialite burning into me. They were waiting for an explanation. They were waiting for me to apologize for ruining the party. Instead, I clicked the remote in my hand one more time. The massive projection screen behind me flickered to life again. This time, there was no video. There was a document. It was blown up to 12 feet tall, crisp and undeniable. It was a marriage license issued by the state of Florida County of Miami-Dade. The date was from 4 years ago. The names on the certificate were clear enough for people in the back row to read without their glasses: Hunter Vance and Sarah Jenkins. I walked toward the head table where Hunter was standing. He looked like a cornered animal, sweat beading on his forehead, his designer tuxedo suddenly looking like a costume that didn't fit. "You told my family you were a bachelor, Hunter," I said, my voice steady and amplified, echoing off the stone walls of the house. "You told my sister you were building a life together. You stood in front of this man of God, my father, and asked for his blessing. But you forgot to mention one small detail. You are already married." A ripple of whispers tore through the crowd. I pointed to the screen. "There is no divorce decree, Hunter. I checked the clerk of court's database this morning. You are legally married to Sarah. You have 2 children with her. 2 children you abandoned 6 months ago to come here and prey on my sister. In the state of Illinois, entering into a second marriage while still legally wed is a Class 4 felony. It is called bigamy." Hunter slammed his hands on the table, rattling the silverware. "It is a lie," he shouted, his voice cracking. "We are separated. The papers are pending." She forged that document. I didn't argue. I just clicked the remote again. The screen changed. A new document appeared. This one was a timeline of text messages and bank transfers. "Pending papers don't explain why you sent her $2,000 last week with the memo quote, 'Hush money,' end quote, do they?" I asked. I turned to the crowd, addressing the wealthy men Hunter had been trying to impress all night. "He told you he was an investor. He told you he managed offshore funds. He told you he was going to double your money." I clicked the remote. The screen filled with a chaotic spiderweb of financial statements. They were red. All red. Hunter Vance does not own a hedge fund. He owns a gambling addiction. I highlighted the line items: the Mirage Casino, DraftKings, underground bookies in Miami. He owes $215,000 to private lenders who are not known for their patience. He didn't propose to Ebony because he loved her. He proposed because he thought my parents were rich. He thought the dowry and the wedding gifts would cover his debt before his kneecaps got broken. I looked at Ebony. She was staring at the screen, her mouth open, her face a mask of absolute horror. The man she was trapping with a baby was not a golden ticket. He was an anchor, and he was dragging her straight to the bottom of the ocean. "He is broke ebony," I said softly into the microphone. "He has negative net worth. He was going to use your wedding money to pay off loan sharks. And when that ran out, he would have drained your credit too." The humiliation was total. But the final blow came from the table near the buffet. An older couple dressed in impeccably tailored suits stood up. They were Hunter's parents, or at least the people posing as his wealthy benefactors. They looked at the screen, then at their son, and then at the crowd of judging faces. They didn't rush to his side. They didn't defend him. They did the only thing people obsessed with status know how to do. They cut their losses. Hunter's father buttoned his jacket, grabbed his wife's elbow, and began to walk briskly toward the exit. "Mom." Dad Hunter called out, his voice small and pathetic. "Where are you going?" His mother didn't even look back. She just quickened her pace, desperate to escape the blast radius of her son's explosion. Hunter watched them leave. He watched his safety net vanish. He looked around the garden. The deacons were shaking their heads. The neighbors were recording on their phones. My parents were staring at him with a mixture of confusion and betrayal, too stunned to speak. He was alone. And a narcissist alone is a dangerous thing. He turned his eyes to me. The fear in his face vanished, replaced by a pure, unadulterated hatred. I was the source of his pain. I was the one who had stripped him naked in front of the world. "You witch!" he snarled. He didn't think. He reacted. He lunged across the space between us. He moved fast, fueled by adrenaline and rage. He knocked over a tray of champagne flutes, sending glass shattering across the patio. His hands were reaching for my throat. He wanted to silence me. He wanted to crush the voice that was speaking his truth. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I didn't drop the microphone. Because I knew something he didn't. I wasn't alone. Just as Hunter's fingers were inches from my neck, a blur of motion intercepted him. Two men in dark suits, the private security contractors I had briefed hours ago, materialized from the shadows. They didn't just stop him. They neutralized him. One guard caught Hunter's arm, twisting it behind his back with a practiced fluid motion. The other swept his legs. Hunter hit the stone patio with a bone-jarring thud. The air left his lungs in a wheezing gasp. "Get off me!" he screamed, struggling against the weight of the guard's knee pressed into his spine. "Do you know who I am?" I walked over to where he lay pinned to the ground. I looked down at him, at the dirt staining his tuxedo, at the spittle on his lips. "Yes, Hunter," I said, my voice echoing through the silent garden. "We know exactly who you are. You are a fraud. You are a bigamist. And now you are a trespasser." I looked up at the police officers, who were now making their way through the crowd, handcuffs glinting in the fairy lights. "Officers," I said calmly, "I would like to press charges for attempted assault, and I believe you have a warrant from Florida that needs executing." The guests parted like the Red Sea as the uniformed officers approached. Hunter was hauled to his feet, his resistance gone, replaced by the limp defeat of a man who realizes the game is truly over. I turned back to the crowd. I smoothed my black dress. I looked at my parents, who were trembling by the stage. "I told you," I said to them, my voice devoid of anger, filled only with a cold, final resolution. "I am cleaning house, and I am just getting started." Hunter was in the back of a squad car, watching his life disintegrate through reinforced glass, but the real architects of my misery were still standing on the patio. My parents and my sister were huddled together near the stage, looking like survivors of a shipwreck. They were trembling, their eyes darting around the garden, looking for sympathy from the guests, who were now looking at them with unmasked disgust. My mother Bernice tried to salvage the unsalvageable. She stepped toward the remaining deacons, wringing her hands, tears streaming down her face. "We did not know," she wailed, her voice trembling with a performance of victimhood. "We were deceived. Hunter tricked us. He ruined our family. Please, you have to believe us. We are victims here too." I tapped the microphone. The sound echoed through the yard, sharp and unforgiving. "Stop it, Mother," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was absolute. "You were not tricked. You were accomplices. And Hunter was just a symptom of your greed. He didn't bankrupt you. You did that all by yourself." I clicked the remote one more time. The screen behind me shifted. Gone were the images of Hunter's gambling debts. In their place was a document that made my father's knees buckle. It was a foreclosure notice, but not just any notice. It was the deed to their house, the house I grew up in, the house they had leveraged to fund their lies. "You took out a second mortgage on the church, Dad," I said, addressing him directly. "You funneled $400,000 into a shell company to pay for luxury cars and this wedding. But you forgot one thing. When you missed 3 payments in a row last month, the bank put the note up for sale." Desmond stared at the screen, his face turning an ashy gray. "How do you know that?" he whispered. "That is confidential." It was confidential, I agreed. Until I bought it. I let that sink in. I watched the realization dawn on him. He wasn't looking at his daughter anymore. He was looking at his creditor. "I formed an LLC 3 months ago." I continued pacing slowly across the stone patio. "I purchased your non-performing loan from the bank. I own the debt. I own the mortgage. And as of this morning, I own the title." I reached into the pocket of my black dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I held it up. It fluttered in the evening breeze. "This is an eviction notice," I said. "It is effective immediately." Bernice screamed. It was a raw, ugly sound. "You cannot do that. That is our home. We raised you there. You raised me to be a bank account, not a daughter." I shot back. "And that house is not yours. It belongs to me. And since I have evidence of you plotting to kidnap my child and defraud a trust, I am exercising my right as the property owner to remove squatters who pose a criminal threat." I looked at the security guards. "Change the locks on the Sycamore Avenue property tonight," I ordered. "If they try to enter, have them arrested for trespassing." My parents stood there stripped of their home, their reputation, and their pulpit. They were homeless. They were facing prison time for the church embezzlement. They were finished. But I wasn't done. There was one person left. I turned my eyes to Ebony. My sister was trying to sneak away. She was edging toward the side gate, her head down, trying to disappear into the darkness. She wanted to run away and reinvent herself just like she always did. "Ebony," I called out. She froze. "Do not leave yet," I said. "You forgot your party favor." The screen changed for the final time. It showed a credit card statement. It was the card Ebony had used to book the florist, the caterer, and the tent rental. The balance was $60,000. "You put the entire wedding on your personal credit," I explained to the crowd. "You thought Hunter was going to pay it off with my money. But Hunter is in handcuffs. And I am certainly not paying it." Ebony spun around, her face twisted in panic. "Jada, please. I cannot pay that. I do not have a job. They will sue me." "Then I guess you better start looking for a shift at the mall," I said coldly. "Because that debt is in your name. You wanted a 6-figure wedding. You bought it. It is all yours." Ebony looked around for help. She looked at her friends, the bridesmaids she had bragged to for months. She looked for Tiffany, her maid of honor. But Tiffany wasn't helping. Tiffany was holding up her phone. The red light was on. She was live streaming. I watched as Ebony realized what was happening. She wasn't just being exposed to the garden. She was being broadcast to the world. "Tiffany, stop!" Ebony shrieked, shielding her face. "Stop filming." But Tiffany laughed, a cruel social climbing laugh. "Girl, this is viral gold. The bride is a fraud. The baby daddy is the ex. The sister is the landlord. You are trending, Ebony. Look at the comments. Everyone is laughing at you." Ebony lunged at Tiffany, but she tripped on the hem of her expensive gown. She fell hard onto the grass, a heap of white silk and humiliation. She lay there sobbing, the camera phone hovering over her like a vulture. The golden child was in the dirt. The princess was a pauper. I looked at the three of them. My father the false prophet. My mother the enabler. My sister the parasite. They had taken everything from me for 30 years. My confidence, my peace, my trust. Tonight I took it all back, with interest. I signaled to the security team. Escort them off the property, I said, and make sure they do not take anything that doesn't belong to them, which according to my records is everything. The guards moved in. They took my parents by the arms. They hauled Ebony up from the grass. As they were dragged toward the gate, kicking and screaming, shouting curses at me, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I felt light. The guests parted to let them pass, staring at them like they were contagious. The heavy iron gates slammed shut behind them with a finality that rang through the night. I stood alone on the patio. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was clean. I looked at the crowd. I raised my microphone one last time. I apologize for the disruption, I said, my voice calm and gracious. Please enjoy the food. I paid for it after all. And unlike my family, I believe in getting what you pay for. I dropped the microphone. It hit the stone with a dull thud. I turned and walked back into my house, leaving the ruins of their lives behind me. The air in the kitchen tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. The last of the luxury sedans had sped away, carrying the horrified guests back to their safe, quiet lives. The garden, once filled with jazz music and laughter, was now illuminated only by the stark, rotating red and blue lights of 3 police cruisers parked in my driveway. The party was over, but the final act of justice was just beginning. My parents, Desmond and Bernice, stood near the gate, their suitcases sitting forlornly on the pavement. They looked small. Without the adoration of their congregation and the validation of their social circle, they were just 2 bitter people who had committed crimes they could no longer hide. Detective Miller, a man with a weary face who had seen too much family violence in his career, stepped forward. He didn't look at them with the reverence they were used to. He looked at them like suspects. Desmond Williams and Bernice Williams, he said, his voice cutting through the night air. You are under arrest. My father straightened his back, trying to summon the authority of the pulpit one last time. This is a mistake, officer. My daughter is confused. She is having a mental episode. We are the victims here. You cannot arrest a man of God on his own property. Detective Miller didn't blink. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked ominously. It is not your property, Mr. Williams. The deed belongs to the LLC that evicted you, and you are not being arrested for trespassing. You are being arrested for grand larceny, wire fraud, and embezzlement of church funds. We have the bank records. We have the transfer slips to your daughter's wedding vendors. Bernice let out a strangled cry, clutching her husband's arm. But we intended to pay it back. It was a loan. The detective ignored her, and he added, turning to look at me standing on the porch. Based on the video evidence provided tonight, we are also charging you with domestic battery and child endangerment. Striking your daughter and plotting to falsify protective services reports to kidnap your granddaughter is a serious offense. The color drained from Bernice's face. She looked at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. You gave them the video! You sent your own mother to jail! I walked down the steps, stopping a few feet away from them. I looked at the woman who had slapped me. I looked at the man who had choked me. I didn't send you to jail, Bernice, I said, using her first name for the first time. The truth sent you to jail. I just provided the evidence. Officer, please, Desmond begged as the cuffs were snapped onto his wrists. He flinched at the cold metal. Think about my reputation. Think about the church. Your reputation died the moment you stole from the offering plate, Desmond, I said. I watched as the officers led them to the back of the squad cars. They walked with their heads down, stripped of their pride, stripped of their power. They looked old. They looked defeated. And then there was Ebony. My sister was sitting on the curb, her expensive white dress stained with grass and dirt. She wasn't being arrested. Her crimes were moral and financial, not criminal, at least not yet. She was just collateral damage. She watched our parents get loaded into the police cars, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. She looked up at me as I turned to go back inside. Jada. She sobbed, her voice trembling. Where am I supposed to go? Hunter is gone. Mom and Dad are arrested. I have no money. I have nowhere to sleep. I stopped. I looked at the sister who had tried to rob my safe. The sister who had planned to trap a man with a baby that wasn't his. The sister who had mocked me for years while spending my money. You are a smart girl, Ebony, I said, my voice devoid of pity. You figured out how to spend $60,000 on a wedding. I am sure you can figure out how to rent a motel room. But I am pregnant, she screamed. Then I suggest you call Tyrell, I said. Maybe he has a couch you can crash on. I signaled to the security guard standing by the gate. Close it, and do not let her back in. I walked into the house and locked the door behind me. The sound of the heavy deadbolt sliding into place was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. An hour later, the house was quiet. The police were gone. The caterers had packed up the uneaten food and left. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. It was full of peace. I sat on the kitchen counter dressed in my silk pajamas, eating strawberry ice cream straight from the carton. Beside me sat Maya, her eyes puffy but bright. Barnaby, heavily sedated and sporting a bright blue cast on his leg, was sleeping soundly on a new orthopedic bed in the corner. Maya took a big spoonful of ice cream. Mommy? She asked. Yes, baby. Are the bad people coming back? I looked at the front door. I had already called a 24-hour locksmith. He was out there right now, drilling out the old cores, installing high-security smart locks that only I could control. No, baby, I said, kissing the top of her head. They are never coming back. This is our castle now, and the drawbridge is pulled up. We ate in silence for a while, just enjoying the safety of our own home. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. The shoe had dropped and I was still standing. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was late, almost midnight. I expected it to be Catherine, my lawyer, giving me an update on the arraignment, but it was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then picked it up. This is Jada, a deep professional voice answered. Ms. Williams, my name is Marcus Sterling. I was a guest at your dinner tonight. I am the CEO of Sterling Tech. I stiffened. I apologize for the scene, Mr. Sterling. I know it was unprofessional. On the contrary, he said, his voice filled with admiration. I have been trying to find a forensic accountant with a spine for 5 years. I watched you dismantle a complex fraud ring in real time with poise and absolute precision. That was the most impressive presentation I have ever seen. I lowered the spoon. Thank you. I have a situation in my company, he continued. Internal embezzlement. My current auditors are too scared to dig deep because the suspect is my CFO. I need someone who isn't afraid to burn the house down to find the rats. I want to hire you, and I am prepared to double whatever your current firm is paying. I looked at Maya. I looked at the new keys sitting on the counter. I looked at the reflection of a woman who had survived the fire and come out made of steel. I smiled. I am expensive, Mr. Sterling, I said. I am counting on it, he replied. Can you start Monday? I took another bite of ice cream. The sweetness hit my tongue, mixing with the taste of victory. I will see you Monday, I said. I hung up the phone and wrapped my arm around my daughter. The nightmare was over. The toxic branches had been pruned. And as I looked out the window at the Chicago skyline glowing gold in the distance, I knew one thing for sure. My parents tried to break me to save themselves. But all they did was forge a weapon that the world was just beginning to fear. My name is Jada. I am a mother. I am a survivor. And I am just getting started. This experience taught me that sharing DNA does not grant anyone a license to abuse you. For decades, I believed that honoring my parents meant tolerating their toxicity, but I realized that true family protects. It never preys. Walking away was not an act of cruelty. It was a necessary act of survival for both myself and my daughter. We often fear the collapse of our old lives, but sometimes burning a bridge is the only way to light the path to a healthy future. My greatest victory was not the revenge itself, but finally realizing that my peace is non-negotiable. If Jada's journey to freedom resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe and tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to choose your peace over your family?